Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started here in just a minute. Welcome, welcome. I am Trustee Hine. I am the co-chair of the Free Speech and Civil Discourse Committee, and we're so excited that you're here tonight. And I am so proud to be a part of a university that really values free speech. And that's what we're here today to talk about. And the freedom to debate and to have conversations that may or may not be easy and talk about competing ideas. And that's what CMU is about. So in addition to supporting free speech, we hold very dear the idea of civility and what that means. And it's coupled with free speech. You can't have one really without the other. And so tonight, with the Dignity and Dialogue series, we've got another great speaker, and he has some really great things to say. And so I think you guys will enjoy him. And just a reminder that civil discourse is the ability to engage in conversation with the intention of enhancing understanding, providing constructive dialogue that is robust, honest, and seeks to advance public and societal interest. With that in mind, please note the name of the series, Dignity and Dialogue, which is closely tied to our values as an institution. Remaining present in the conversation and avoiding distraction is critical for active listening, so we encourage a thoughtful discussion of ideas tonight during tonight's event without interruptions. It is often said that individuals listen to respond, not to understand. Engaging in differences constructively is valuable and allows us to connect as humans. Your voice is important, so there will be an opportunity to engage with participants towards the end of the event. We hope you enjoy tonight's event, our Dignity and Dialogue series that we're very proud of. And without further delay, I'm honored to introduce President John Marshall, Trustee David Foster, and our very, very special guest, Bret Stephens.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for making time and attending tonight's talk. This moment it marks a special ending to what we call the Holocaust Awareness Series, and I want to just start by acknowledging Dr. Vince Paterino and the great work he has done over 22 years to ensure this great event. This also is part of an ongoing effort by Colorado Mesa University as part of our civic forum. This attempt and this aspiration to continue to bring a more civil dialogue to Western Colorado and for our community. And so I just want to thank you in advance. Professor Hine, thank you for setting the stage for this. Tonight is going to be a conversation that we hope is really interesting and really centered around difficult topics such as anti-Semitism. And I want to start by acknowledging Trustee David Foster, who's been just a tremendous leader on this topic more broadly, but has really been a driving force over the last several years as we have brought some incredible voices and had some great talks here at CMU. With that, I want to introduce our guest and guy who probably needs not a lot of introduction, and I'm going to let him talk a little bit about his personal background, which is both interesting and varied. But professionally, Bret came through the University of Chicago, studied comparative politics at the London School of Economics, spent time at the Wall Street Journal in Brussels, also editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post at the tender age of 27, I understand. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for his foreign affairs work at the Journal and has been at the New York Times now since 2017. In 2022, the government of Russia barred him for life, which I assume means you will receive a very warm welcome here in Grand Junction, Mr. Bret Stephens. Brett, why don't you start by just giving us a little bit of a sense of your background, because it's probably a little bit of a different route than maybe some of us in terms of where you grew up and how you got here.
People don't typically expect a kid named Stephens to be Jewish, and they don't expect that a guy named Stephens grew up in Mexico City. So Mexico's my hometown. They often don't think that my mother, who is alive, was a hidden child in World War II in northern Italy. She herself was the daughter of a woman who first had to flee the Bolsheviks in 1918 when my great-grandfather was arrested and never heard from again, and then had to flee the Nazis in 1933 from Berlin when Hitler came to power. My mother grew up early years of her life in hiding and then was a displaced person, stateless person, and came to the United States in 1950, thanks to Harry Truman's Displaced Persons Act, with $7 as a refugee. And it's something that always informs my thinking, that my mother arrived in this country penniless, so that 65 years later, Tucker Carlson could accuse me of being an out-of-touch elite. It's a great country. And on my father's side, my grandfather was born in a little city in southeastern Europe called Kishinev, that in 1903 experienced a horrific pogrom, massacre of Jews. And 100 years later, I actually visited Kishinev, and I remember looking up to the sky and thinking, as the poem goes, whatever gods may be, that my great-grandmother said, we are getting out of here. Because what would have happened to them had they stayed in Europe is devastating. And the fact that the United States took my mother, took my grandfather, I think enhances my love for this country, explains why I'm so grateful to be an American citizen and to live in the one republic outside of Israel that has always been a welcoming place to people of all faiths, creeds, and backgrounds. Well, not always, but has tried at its best to always be a welcoming place, and was a welcoming place for me, so that I could, pursue the dream of being a journalist and I guess the word is thought leader, but having the life that I have and creating the opportunities I can for my children. So there's nothing like having an immigrant background to make you love this country even more.
Is this on? Thanks. I really appreciate that as your introduction, and thank you, John, as always, for everything that you do for this institution and giving me a chance to be a part of this. We talked a little bit earlier today, and we share the same history in terms of Stephens and Foster, not particularly Jewish last names, and we got to our last name in a circuitous sort of way.
I thought what we shared was gastrointestinal distress. But,
well, apparently only one of us has that issue, and it's this guy.
You mainly, right?
Yeah. We'll get to that later, maybe. And
just so you know, his lunch consisted of fried chicken on a donut, for which he looks pretty good considering your diet.
Look, I'm not going to go toe-to-toe with you here, but we have a whole night together, and you're welcome for the popcorn toffee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Where was I? So I have been asked for the last number of years, as a Jewish guy from Denver, why am I over here at Colorado Mesa on the board? And I have my own answers, and it's less important tonight than the question that I have for you, and that is, when you were asked to come out to Colorado Mesa, why did you say yes?
So I do a lot of public speaking. Night before last, I spoke to an Orthodox synagogue in New York to 850 people. On Monday, I'll be at Stanford University, and in a couple weeks, I'll be at Harvard. And so I speak to two kinds of audiences. One audience that agrees with me before I've opened my mouth, and another audience that disagrees with me before I've opened my mouth. And that's a little discouraging. You're either in for a love fest or a fist fight, rhetorically speaking. I really wanted to speak to an audience that had an open mind, and one that didn't at least automatically feel like it had a dog in the fight, and that was curious about anti-Semitism, Israel, the future of the American Republic, these sorts of questions, which are, by the way, I think, related questions. So for years, I've been saying to my speaking agent, various others, I'm like, I'm sick of talking either to the converted or to the enemy. Let me talk to an audience that is just interested without coming to the event with priors. And so, Mesa, I thought, well, that sounds like just the kind of place. Grand Junction had a kind of a poetic ring for me, and I'm really, really excited to be here.
And what you probably don't know is Mesa is the Harvard of the Western Slope. So you might add that.
I'm sorry, but I think you are dissing Mesa by comparing it to Harvard. Just for the record, I just spent time in a classroom with some really, really bright students asking great questions. And I assure you, those are better questions that are asked with more curiosity and intelligence than anything I'm going to hear at Harvard's Kennedy School in a couple weeks.
So Bret, we're sitting here tonight talking about anti-Semitism in the context of Holocaust awareness. But the reality is that marginalized populations anywhere, there's an interest in a place like CMU, of course, to ensure that our students from all backgrounds feel safe, feel welcome when they're here. You have been able to help us understand anti-Semitism as it maybe applies more broadly across our culture, across our country. And I wonder if you might take a few moments, in particular around the Jewish faith, to help us understand why anti-Semitism matters and how that ties to maybe some of the central tenets of America itself.
Look, the most obvious answer, and it's a correct one, came in George Washington's letter to the Newport, Rhode Island congregation. I think this goes to 1791. He uses this expression that in the United States, he says, "To bigotry, no sanction." It is a foundational idea of American life. To bigotry, no sanction. And between 2007 and last year, before the attacks of October 7th, the United States registered a 500% increase in anti-Semitic incidents that were noted. Great many anti-Semitic incidents never rise to the level of a police report, formal complaint, but a 500% increase in what was observed. And since October 7th, the numbers have just grown, I think, by orders of magnitude. So in any country where we worry about bigotry, we should be particularly worried that more than 50% of all religiously based hate crimes are being targeted at a population which is about 2% of the country. So that's the first point. We are seeing a radical increase in a particular, in a kind of bigotry, and so any American who cares that this is a country that provides no sanction to bigotry should be alarmed. The second reason is that anti-Semitism isn't just a bigotry. It is a symptom. It is a symptom of a dysfunction in the society itself. whenever you encounter societies that are becoming saturated by anti-Semitism, they are societies in which conspiracy theories are gaining ground. Why? Because anti-Semitism is not just a bigotry about Jews, it's a conspiracy theory about Jews. Anytime you've heard something said about Jews in an anti-Semitic vein, it's, well, you know, the Jews control the media, or the Jews control banking, or the Jews control one industry or another, or the Jews are responsible for all the wars in the world, or all problems would be solved if the Jewish conspiracy were exposed. Well, in societies where conspiracy theory reigns, irrationalism reigns. And we should be worried about an America where people will believe anything about anything, whether it's Jews control the world or Bill Gates put a microchip in your arm with the J&J vaccine, or whatever vaccine he was behind, the Moderna vaccine. That is another thing that ought to really concern us. But the main reason is that Jews have stood for a set of ideals and practices that ought to be dear to any American of any religious persuasion. You know, when the old Negro spiritual said, Moses, go down to Pharaoh land, let my people go, it was attaching the desire and the thirst of Black Americans for freedom to the original freedom story in the world, which is Moses leading the Jews out of Egypt, leading them out of oppression and tyranny in Egypt. Judaism is nothing if not a freedom-seeking religion. Judaism's great contribution to civilization, arguably, greatest contribution, is monotheism, one God. What does one God mean? It means one ethical standard for all human beings, because all human beings were created in the image of God. It means that we can sit here in Grand Junction and say that when Vladimir Putin is assassinating his opponents, that is wrong even if we are not Russians. Doesn't matter that there's a cultural difference because we have certain fundamental ethical standards beginning with the words, thou shalt not murder, right? This is foundational to Jewish religion, and it's become foundational to any decent society. Jews have this idea called argument for the sake of heaven. It comes from the ethics of our fathers, Pirkei Avot. Argument for the sake of heaven. In most religions, the head of the religion says, this is what our faith stands for, and if you disagree, you are a heretic, or you're not a part of our religion. Judaism is unique, in my understanding of of great religions, in that it asks the dissenting view to be a part of what makes that religion basic. It asks that the views of Rabbi Hillel and Rabbi Shammai, who disagreed with on all kinds of doctrinal points, that both views be inscribed in the tradition. In the Supreme Court in the United States, when there is an opinion, we don't just register the views of the majority. We insist on the views of the minority being published as well, because we know that, say, the dissent in Plessy versus Ferguson would become the majority opinion, thank God, 60 years later in Brown versus Board. So bringing the dissenting view into the tradition and saying to disagree is part of what it means to be part of a community. It doesn't make you an outcast of that community. That's important. Two more aspects of it. One of the reasons why Judaism held together through 2,000 years of exile is that every Jew, to be a Jew, had to have a bar mitzvah. And what happens at a bar mitzvah? You read from the Torah. Meaning literacy was central to what it meant to be a Jew. Now, literacy today we all take for granted, but 1,500 years ago, maybe 1% of the population was literate. So the idea of universal education as part of the tradition is another important feature of being a Jew. And the final aspect is peoplehood, the idea that you can have an identity that is not just your personal identity as an individual human being, not just your political identity as a subject of a king or a citizen of a state, but a middle identity as a Jew, as Mexican, as Chinese, a hyphenated identity. Now, when we think about what makes America a great country, I would argue the idea of a universal morality, of ethics and obligations applying to everyone, is central to our idea of what it is to be an American citizen. Freedom seeking for all people who face oppression, whether it's a minority, a racial minority, a minority in terms of sexual orientation or anything else, that is something, freedom seeking is something the American people honor. We honor dissent, we honor disagreement in America. We honor hyphenated identities. We honor education. These things that I just described as foundationally Jewish values are also foundationally American values, which is why when the original, forefathers of the country, if you want to call them that, at least intellectually, came here, they came to this world to found a new Jerusalem. So when we worry about anti-Semitism, I know this is a long answer, when we worry about anti-Semitism, we should worry about it not because it's targeted at the Jews, right? The Jews were 2% of the population, okay? Because what it ultimately aims at are the ideals that make America what it is. And so every American ought to be invested in anti-Semitism because for the same reason that when you see a symptom of something that could be cancer, you're going to deal with it quickly. Deal with it this moment you see it. And the first symptom of cancer in a democratic society, or one of the first symptoms, will be that the Jews will be targeted.
I often think of that dissent issue between the two houses, and one of the dissent stories and the debates was how to light the Hanukkah, right? And the House of Hillel said, we're going to light, one additional light each night, and the House of Shammai said, well, we'll start with all of them and then reduce it. Obviously, we know who won, that debate. But the fact that we even know that there was a debate, speaks to that issue of recognizing dissent. I've always seen, for my whole life, anti-Semitism was always with a white hood. Anti-Semitism was, Charlottesville. Anti-Semitism was really obvious. And frankly, post-October 7th, it has impacted me and my family and our whole community very, very differently. Do you think, and when I say differently, just to be more specific, it's the far left now that has what seems to be all of a sudden found this Jew hatred. And I'm curious, was it always there?
Yeah, look, I'm going to, trigger warning, I'm going to say something, an anti-Semitic line. What is the worldly religion of the Jew? Money. What is his daily god? Hucksterism. You know who said that? Karl Marx. And there's a long history of left-wing anti-Semitism. By the way, most of the anti-Semitic tropes that are now coursing through a lot of discourse came straight out of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was a factory for anti-Semitism, and anyone who has roots in Russia knows how awfully the Soviets treated the Jewish population. It was a nationality. Jews were kept out of all kinds of professions, and a lot of that seeped into far-left discourse. But there's another reason, and this is an important point. Anti-Semitism is a bigotry like other bigotries, like racism, homophobia, and so on, but it's unlike in a certain way, and I'll tell you how. Most forms of bigotry think of themselves as a form of punching down. The racist is a white guy who's punching down at a black person or whoever it is, who he feels is beneath him. Anti-Semites think they are punching up. They always think that when you're attacking the Jews, even if it's some poor guy, defenseless, with no money, that you are striking a blow against the people who secretly control the world. I guess if we secretly controlled the world, we wouldn't have had 2,000 years of pogroms and holocausts and so on, right? I mean, if we controlled the world, we wouldn't get slaughtered in such great numbers. But anti-Semitism expresses itself as a form of punching up. Now, too often, a lot of at least the far left sees its role as being the advocate of little people against the 0.1% who control the world. So the gap between a kind of a progressive believer who thinks that if it only weren't for the 0.1%, you know, we'd have a more equitable society, and the people who say, well, it happens that that 0.1% is basically Jewish. Like, those are overlaps that happen very easily. It's why the former labor leader in Great Britain, Jeremy Corbyn, big-time leftist, also constantly expressing himself in anti-Semitic terms. And Jews have too long a history of confronting both left and right-wing anti-Semitism for us to pretend that the bad guys are on the other side of the political aisle. I, as a conservative, need to be especially vocal in pointing out that when right-wingers talk about the globalist cabal conspiring in Davos to screw ordinary working-class Americans by replacing them with cheap Hispanic labor, right? All of that smacks of what Henry Ford was saying about the international Jew, right? It is the loudest dog whistle in history. But at the same time, when I hear people on the left say, well, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm an anti-Zionist. Oh, and how is that? Well, the Zionists are purposely and gratuitously massacring their enemies. They are harvesting their organs for the sake of, you know, using them in their own hospitals. They're the most powerful country in the world. By the way, the gross domestic product of the state of Israel is slightly smaller than the gross domestic product of the state of Colorado. So in case any of you are wondering, why doesn't Colorado rule the world? I mean, you do, morally speaking, right, in terms of coolness, but that's the size of the state of Israel, right? But when anti-Zionists say they're not anti-Semites, and yet everything they say about Israel replicates an old-fashioned anti-Semitic trope or belief, then I'm sorry, you're not fooling me. You're not fooling me. By just saying you're not against, by just substituting the word Jew with Zionist, and then finding a handful of anti-Zionist Jews to justify what you're saying, doesn't acquit you, okay? You're not acquitted of being a racist just because a handful of, say, and it is the case that during the time of Jim Crow, you could probably find a handful of black Americans who are like, oh, the system's fine. Separate but equal is great. At a certain point, you have to say, no, that is a bigotry, and I'm going to call it out. And unless you prove to me that you're not a bigot, the burden of proof lies with you to demonstrate that. So let's be, as Jews, let's be absolutely open and clear about the threat from the right, from the Charlottesville types. But let's also be clear about the threat from the left. Just the other day at Berkeley, an 89-year-old Holocaust survivor at the Berkeley, not the university, at the city council, stood up for some proclamation recognizing Holocaust Remembrance Day. And she was heckled and shouted down by pro-Palestinian protesters who said, you know, who called them cowards and money grubbers, or words to that effect. If you can't see anti-Semitism there, you will never be able to see anti-Semitism.
Bret, I want to go back to this point that you highlighted. I think the concept you described is this argument for the sake of heaven, and the idea of something like intellectual pluralism and the debate and argument. But you're also describing in a moment where culturally it's really hard for us to have honest intellectual discussion. I think there's a lot of people, even on a university campus, that despite our best efforts might be nervous to raise questions and get involved in the fray. And so I want to hit on one that maybe hits on a post-October 7 world, which is there a space for someone to say, I'm not an anti-Semite, or I certainly don't want to be, but I'm also not entirely thrilled with all the behaviors and actions and policies of the state of Israel, and is being critical of Israel, in fact, like where do you see that line and sort of walking that argument in a way that allows further argument?
So it's such an important question, and I've heard that before, and I think it's important to talk about it. I have no idea of what the political orientation of this room is, but I'm just going to guess. Let's say a great many of you either despised the former president or despised the current president. But I can tell you one thing. Whatever side you stand on does not make you anti-American. Because you ought, as a person in a democratic society, to have every right to despise a leader or a government or a policy without despising the people or the nation. So if you want virulent criticism of Israeli government policy on all levels, go to haaretz.com, a leading Israeli newspaper, and you will find the sharpest criticism you'll ever find of Israeli policy. But it recognizes that actually criticism can be a form of patriotism.
In fact, there wasn't a synagogue, there wasn't a rabbi during Yom Kippur this last year who likely wasn't critical of Israel.
Right.
Right? I mean, from every pulpit in the entire country, they were critical.
Look,
in some way.
I have been calling for, I think I publicly called for Netanyahu to step down in 2018, so I got Chuck Schumer beat by 6 years, right? It's entirely legitimate to do that. But when you say, okay, and by the way, you don't like the war? Fine. You think Israel is massively overreacting? Fine. You think Israel should get out of Palestinian areas like the West Bank? Fine. All of that, 100% kosher, so to speak. Okay? That's all correct to say. I might agree or disagree on one point or another, and that's a conversation honest, honorable people can have. But when you say the one state in the world that has no right to exist is the Jewish state, and if the reasons you give me, all right, are reasons that I could apply to 10 other states, and I ask, well, why don't you think Russia doesn't have a right to exist? Or Pakistan doesn't have a right to exist? Or, I mean, we all know Belgium has no right to exist, right? You know, I'm sorry, Belgium. Actually lived there for a couple of years, nice country. But when the state you happen to single out by way of a double standard happens to be the Jewish state, then my presumption is something anti-Semitic is going on. Because you're not applying the same standard conduct of behavior to Israel than you are to other countries. You know, I'll give you an example. Okay, people right now are very upset about the bombing of Gaza, and I understand that, and we can have a conversation about it. You look at pictures of Gaza, it used to be, you know, intact buildings and so on, and now flattened, destroyed, horrifying. I get it. They're awful images. My own view is Hamas bears responsibility for every one of those things. But that's a conversation worth having. But here's what bothers me. The United States flattened Mosul. You don't even remember it. 7 years ago, first under President Obama, a Democrat, and then under President Trump, a Republican, we flattened the place. And there are before and after pictures that you can look up quickly on the internet. You know, Mosul, normal city, 2013, after the US is done with it, 2017, just rubble, looking like Stalingrad. When was the last time you saw a university protest against the American bombardment of tens of thousands of civilians in Mosul? No, there wasn't a peep about that. By the way, I haven't seen anything like the fervor on so-called elite campuses about what Russia continues to do in Ukraine as about Israel. Now, this isn't, you know, as the young people say, this isn't a question of whataboutism. But what I'm asking for is intellectual consistency. Okay? You don't like Israel's behavior because of X, but you have nothing to say about it in so many other contexts. You're singling out the Jewish state in a way that is just fair and false. And the nature of anti-Semitism has always relied, like so many bigotries, on double standards. By the way, think of any other bigotry you'd like, right? And you'll notice that what so rankles is the double standard. Right? Why is it that African American drivers get pulled over vastly disproportionately according to, for no other reason other than the color of their skin? And you say, that is racism, right? There's a double standard. You can say, well, they were speeding. Yes, but statistically you look at it and it is racist, okay? But the same people who clearly can see the double standard there totally lose it, see none of it when it comes to Israel. And I'd like to know why. I'd like to at least ask them to give an account of that, of the way in which they single out Israel that way.
We're here on a campus. I'm a dad of college kids, or I have a son who's going to go next year. There's a report in the last couple of days, a poll of Jewish Americans, where nearly 2/3 of Jewish families are making decisions not to send their kid to a certain school because of the existence of what they would consider Jew hate on campus, on a particular campus. And that's a real thing happening today. In the last couple of days, by way of example, at Rutgers, there's a young woman who showed up at a pro-Israel rally, who then had her picture placed all over campus with Free Gaza and Free Palestine all over it. And now she feels unsafe in her dorm. So what do you say to, I don't know, like college presidents, about how they need to obviously respect the First Amendment, but continue to provide the kids on that campus with the certainty of safety? Because without a kid feeling safe, they're not going to learn.
The bright line is speech versus conduct. Clearly, to me, clearly, at any rate, what they did by photographing her, posting that picture all over campus is a matter of conduct. It's clearly behavior intended to intimidate, right? It's not a matter of speech. At that infamous university president congressional testimony, ironically, Claudine Gay, then the president of Harvard, and Liz McGill and the other one, they were right, when they were asked, is calling for the genocide of Jews against the rules of your school? They kept saying, well, it depends on whether the speech becomes conduct or not. In that sense, they were right. Their problem, and the reason people reacted so sharply, and the reason, frankly, they had to go, in my opinion, was that they were upholding the standard of free speech for the first time, and only when it came to the free speech of virulent pro-Palestinian protesters to harass and intimidate Jews. But you know very well that had that speech been directed at another racial or religious or ethnic minority, it would have been deemed intolerable. So my line is, free speech is great as a standard. It is not great as a double standard. And what you had with what you've seen with the Jewish kids is that suddenly free speech becomes the double standard. All these presidents who used to be all into essentially cancel culture and enforcing hate speech regulations, or saying, yes, we believe in free speech, but there are 18,000 considerations of civility, suddenly discovered their free speech bona fides when it was Jews who were being vilified or harassed. And that's intolerable, because that's a that was the double standard. Look, schools ought to foster an environment of physical safety, but they need to also foster an environment of intellectual risk-taking. And part of being an intelligent person is having a certain amount of resilience in the face of speech you don't like, right? You don't want to, you guys don't want to graduate a bunch of students who, they hear, I don't know if they're a Democrat, and they hear someone say, well, I'm going to vote for Trump, and they say, oh, I feel unsafe. Like, that would not be, I assume that's not what the student you're aiming to graduate, right? So actually, there should be no intellectual safe spaces on campus. And by the way, people will say stupid, bigoted, hurtful, prejudicial things, right? But it's when it turns into a de facto conduct, when students feel like they're being targeted, vilified, that they can't walk around, when that kind of hyper-aggressive bullying behavior, which has become the calling card of the pro-Palestinian movement, I'm sorry to say, in the last 6 months, when that takes hold, then I think that's the time when university administrators and presidents step in and make that distinction clear. I just saw Daniel Diermeyer, the chancellor of Vanderbilt University, just had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. And he was perfectly happy to have pro-Palestinian protesters on campus so long as they observed time, place, and manner restrictions. But when they tried to seize a university building, broke through doors and windows, wouldn't leave when asked to, well, he's going to pursue disciplinary processes. And I hope these students get expelled, because there's nothing like an expulsion from a, quote, top 10 university, or I guess top whatever, to clarify the mind about knowing those distinctions. It's the job of leadership not to lose its nerve in the face of students who think that they can bully without consequence.
So in the spirit of further discussion and really fostering conversation around questions, you all have an opportunity to participate tonight. coloradomesa.edu/ask. You can take out your mobile device and you can submit your questions. I'm going to get them right here. And we're going to submit some of these questions to Bret. So if you have one or something's come up as we've been chatting, feel free to get out your phone or mobile device, coloradomesa.edu/ask, and we can submit some of those questions as we continue our conversation here. Bret, while we're doing that, I want to ask a follow-on to what you just described in terms of students navigating difficult topics. Here at CMU, we've tried to rally around this notion of teaching students how to think rather than what to think. And I wonder if, in the context, I think just in the same vein that you were talking about, how do you see that playing out at its best? How do you see that getting off track, and how do we prevent that?
I think the curse of so much of American higher education is that we've moved from what used to be called pedagogy into ideology. And teachers, particularly our so-called elite universities, are very eager to essentially offer political sermons to their students and judge and grade them accordingly, which turns them either into followers or accomplished liars, both of which are bad. Unless you want to go into politics, in which case it's presidential. Look, the great teachers I had, and I had some really great teachers at the University of Chicago, understood that the job of the professor is to lead the student into his best question. You guys have a much tougher task on stage than I do. Answering questions is easy. Asking good questions is hard. And figuring out, for a student to figure out how to focus an inquiry into a single valuable question that contains within it that's pregnant with all kinds of thoughts and possibilities. That's the job of education. The job of education is to instill qualities of simultaneously of confidence and humility in the student. And I've often said to younger people, you have to, and this is a Jewish idea, you have to maintain two thoughts proverbially one in your left pocket, one in your right pocket. The one in your left pocket is, I'm awesome. The one in your right pocket is, I'm an idiot. And the awesome part gives you the confidence to go forward. The idiot part gives you a sense of humility. And how do you maintain these two in tension, like a rubber band that you're stretching without breaking? Because people who are overly confident are insufferable, and people who just think badly of themselves are, neurotics and never get anywhere. So that's to create that productive tension in the soul of your students is so important. It's also important to foster a kind of habits of intelligent skepticism. Skepticism is not cynicism. Skepticism is not saying, like, whatever you tell me, I'm sure is a load of BS, and because you're some successful guy from Denver, to hell with you, right? But skepticism is to say, I don't care what your title is. Whatever you say, I'm going to treat as just the words of another person, and I'm going to ask questions about it. And the skeptical mind is, in a sense, the right democratic mind, small d, democratic. It's always willing to say, just because you're a person with a title or a pedigree or whatever, doesn't mean I'm not entitled to ask tough questions of you. I think that's what education needs to be in the business of doing. And the last aspect is this, and maybe, I don't know if this is more like a function of elite universities, but elite universities are bringing in a lot of people who are asked the following questions, I know it because I have 2 kids in college, on their applications. Tell us about your victimization and tell me more about your identity. So these students, my kids were like, well, I'm an upper middle class high achiever. What are they supposed to say? I mean, they went to the well of their grandma, who actually was a victim. But I think that's terrible because you're self-selecting, or you're selecting students on the basis of, something bad happened to me, and this is me by virtue of my skin tone or my background. How about your character? How about tell us about a time you changed your mind? Or tell us about a challenge that you confronted and how you overcame it. Like things that actually tell you who the person is, the content of the character. That's vitally important. And the final aspect is humility. I got to the University of Chicago, and I got into some argument with, a political argument with someone. This guy named Sean, who was 6'5", dreadlocks, and ferociously smart. And I was fumbling for words in this argument. And he looked at me and he said, in this deep voice, he said, Stephens, you have the verbal acuity of shampoo. It's been 35 years or so, whatever, and I'm still devastated by the remark. And every time I get on stage, I say to myself, just don't have the verbal acuity of shampoo.
Right. A guy with dreadlocks.
Bright guy.
Yeah.
Questions are pouring in. Bret, I wonder, we'll start with something that's very much in your wheelhouse, and that is international affairs. The question centers, and there's a few that are in the same vein, so I'll try and blend them. The future of the U.S.-Israel relationship and how that has been changed and where you think that relationship is going in the context maybe of a post-October 7 world, maybe just, more broadly where you see that heading.
Look, the United States and Israel have had crises in their relations in the past. And if you have long enough memory, 1956, the Suez Canal crisis was a serious near breaking point. in the mid-1970s, when Kissinger was Secretary of State, there was talk of a fundamental reassessment in U.S.-Israel relations. When George H.W. Bush was president and was trying to get the Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir to come to the table with Arab states, another crisis. Crises during the Obama years as well. So now we're here and people are talking about a crisis, and my response is these two countries strategically need each other, because Israel needs the United States as a reliable, democratic superpower that not only provides arms or diplomatic support, but also moral support. Where, you know, the American Jewish community is essentially the same as Israel in terms of the number of Jews. But also the United States needs Israel, because we don't know if, say, President Sisi in Egypt is going to be empowered tomorrow. There could be an assassination in Saudi Arabia, but we pretty much know that whether it's Bibi or Gantz or Bennett or someone else, Israel's going to be a friend of ours, and they're going to help us when we need it, with intelligence, with arms. You know, right now, we have forces in Guam that are potentially exposed to missile fire from China. They're being defended by technology jointly developed by Israel and the United States, the Iron Dome, right? American tanks, M1 tanks, now are being armed with something called the Trophy Active Protection System, developed by the Israeli military industry. Many of our leading chip makers, AI makers, are going to Israel because they're finding that there's a fantastic workforce that's technologically really savvy. So this is not just a client-patron relationship. This is a partnership we need. And by the way, we need it especially because a lot of countries are wondering about the value of an alliance with the United States, right? I mean, the Chinese give you all the money they want. The Russians, it's a no-strings-attached situation. We're losing allies all over Africa, South America. You know, countries that were traditionally American allies are no longer so reliable. So we should be interested in keeping the allies that we have. The next aspect is this, though, and this is what worries me. I think there can be no crisis in relations between Israel and the United States so long as America remains true to our best traditions, that we remain true to who we have always been as a beacon for embattled allies around the world, defending freedom, however imperfectly, but defending freedom one corner or another. If we cease to be that country, if we become, say, isolationists again, I hope that doesn't happen, then the alliance could change. So when I hear some of the isolationist talk, especially on the Republican side, but a kind of a different form of isolationism on the left, that really, really worries me. So the only way we safeguard the future of the alliance is by people on the Democratic side and the Republican side speaking up and saying, this is something we need strategically, but this is something because it reflects our best values as the American people, Jewish, Gentile, or not.
I was actually going to ask, I mean, I know that you've written a little bit about kind of this vacancy. This kind of vacancy of kind of intellect or vacancy of moral clarity on the right. And, you know, I that concerns me. You know, I know that concerns you because I think you probably have, less of a place politically because of that. I didn't know you could kind of produce those mini noises, but I need to get
ventriloquism is my other.
That is?
Is my other.
Oh, you were
skill.
doing that.
Oh, yeah.
That's quite good.
That's me.
Yeah, good. But I mean, kind of following up on the point that you were making. It's all good. I know. All right. Did you get my question?
No, can you repeat the question? I want that ringtone, but...
I think more of a conversation about, maybe it's a little bit of a conversation about where conservative thought goes in America.
Well, it would be good if it were thought. Look, I am a conservative, okay? And my views have not changed from the days that I was the deputy editor of the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, okay? I believe in smaller government. I think lower taxes are better. I believe in the power of markets to change the world. I believe we need a much stronger military. I believe in in ethical standards in our leaders. I am ashamed when those standards are violated. I called for Bill Clinton's impeachment in 1998. I have been as conservative can be, because I believe that you safeguard the institutions of a free society, which is to say, in the old-fashioned sense, a liberal society, by creating a set of supporting institutions which are inherently conservative in their outlook. Because what we are trying to conserve in the United States is a liberal political order dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, right? I am trying to conserve that, and I think that things that conserve it are stable and intact families, a sense of patriotism and civic obligation, a vigorous civil society, thriving businesses, thriving churches, and other, like that's what makes me a conservative. And what I really worry about, I'm just being totally candid here, okay? I mean, I wrote a whole column earlier this year called "The Case for Trump" by someone who wants him to lose. And the most gratifying part of that column is so many people who are Trump voters were like, yeah, well, that was pretty good. Like, that expresses, I understand a lot of what they're saying. But conservatism is not simply a matter of just owning the libs, okay? Or hating the libs. Those libs are your fellow citizens. In my case, it's my spouse, right? And 1.5 of my children.
The smart ones.
I don't know.
Okay.
The educationally, anyway. So we need a conservatism that, number one, recognizes that politics in America can't be a zero-sum game. We win and our enemies are all destroyed, okay? Number two, it comes from a certain set of intellectual traditions which aim to safeguard a free society. So I can't take a conservatism which believes that hates cancel culture but wants to cancel liberals, that believes in free speech but wants to censor all kinds of books. Like, it's one thing or another. Please choose.
Right.
Okay? And more than that, at least since the days of President Eisenhower, conservatives have understood that the margin, the buffer between civilization and calamity is a powerful America that is willing to stand up for our allies at the far-flung corners of the world, because the alternative is Fortress America that didn't serve us well on the eve of Pearl Harbor. So I believe in the freedom of South Korea and the freedom of Lithuania, and certainly and especially the bravery of the Ukrainian people in standing up against the despotism of Vladimir Putin. And in that camp, I also believe that we should be supporting I keep saying imperfect, every country's imperfect, an imperfect but nonetheless vibrant democracy called Israel that is standing up against a totalitarian, theocratic, misogynistic, homophobic enemy known as Hamas. And if we can't be clear about what side we're on there, we have lost the plot.
We've got a question here that I think Rabbi Foster might appreciate. And the question is along the lines of Judaism as a people, those that might be secular, those that might be atheist, and Judaism as a religion. And if you can maybe help our audience understand some of that and how that may affect anti-Semitism in terms of people's assumptions about what a Jew is.
So to be a Jew is to be a member of a people that has a particular religion. And peoplehood is largely defined matrilineally. If your mom was a Jew, you're a Jew. But Judaism has always made room for converts. My wife is a convert to Judaism. And it has always had branches in all colors. You will find, I was in Ethiopia about a year ago, and one of the most moving experiences of my life was to go to a synagogue in Addis Ababa and pray with my fellow Jews whose skin color was a little darker than my own. It was a wonderful reminder that peoplehood is not a race, right? If you ever spend time in Israel, you will notice that half of Israelis have kind of olive skin tones, right? Because their ancestors came from Yemen, came from Iraq, came from Libya. They are, quote, racially, I don't even like using the word, but quote, or ethnically indistinguishable from the Arab societies in which they lived. A great many Jews are, to one extent or another, active or at least passive participants in this religion known as Judaism. And it's a sort of a choose your own adventure when it comes to just how observant you want to be.
We have an organization in Colorado known as Judaism Your Way.
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly, right? With bacon bits on it, right?
We also have an adventure rabbi.
Yeah. But, you know, look, my standard joke is that the synagogue I don't go to is Orthodox. Like, if I were more observant, I go to an Orthodox synagogue, but it's my wife who drags me kicking and screaming to services about 4 or 5 times a year on very high holidays, so I can at least say, okay, well, you know, I mean, you know, I fast on Yom Kippur. But, you know, and that's something that's important to understand. Jews are a people, okay? Our belief is that we have, and maybe it's a myth, but that we have a lineage that goes back to Abraham, to whom a certain land was promised, and who sojourned in Egypt and had children by Sarah and Haggai. That's our story, right? And it is the fact that to be a Jew is to feel that you are connected by a chain not only of family, but a chain of memory and stories and some foundational convictions that make you a Jew. In my case, as unobservant as I am, knowing that my mom was a hidden child in the war, knowing that my grandmother was a refugee from the Nazis, knowing that my great-grandfather was disappeared into the nothingness of a Soviet prison system, right? The idea that this slender thread continued so that I could live the life I have is hugely important to me. It's hugely important to me, and nothing is more important in my life than to transmit to my children the sense that something special happens when you are a part of this remarkable family. Not better or worse, but with an incredible story.
Next question here. The atmosphere against Jewish people under the, quote, anti-Zionism cover is making many Jewish people think, when do we go and where do we go? Which is something our history is plagued by. Hatred, pogroms, and pushing us out of communities. How can we as a community make this place safe, but also a beacon of light, full of curiosity, but also ethical, high standards, and keep everyone safe? Reminds me a little bit of the piece that was in the Atlantic, maybe addressing this topic a few weeks ago.
Franklin Foer's piece.
Yeah.
Look, 65% of America, survey after survey, says they're pro-Israel. At least the last time I looked at this, the most admired minority group in Israel, in America, were Jews. We don't hear it because actually the anti-Semitism we're experiencing is really coming from elite spaces. You know what? It's not coming from Grand Junction. and when I say this is not an elite space, I mean that is the highest compliment I can offer you guys, right? It is happening at Harvard and Columbia and in the pages of the Guernica magazine and all of this, all these places. But we know that the America that has been good to us is an America that's real, and in fact, it's the overwhelming majority. So it is so important for Jews, especially Jews whose lives are, let's say, coastal, right? That we reconnect with an America that continues to support us and share our core convictions about what it means to be a citizen of this country. And look, this is maybe a little inside baseball, but I worry about the character of the American Jewish community because it is an overwhelmingly liberal and often leftist community that is so eager to be, you're so happy as a Jewish parent when your child gets into an elite university and, oh, where does your son go? Well, my son is at, whatever, Harvard. And, Jewish people have to say, enough. The story of Jewish success in America has been that when the cool kids didn't want us at our table, we went and started another table, and then all of a sudden, next thing we knew, everyone wanted to join our table. Well, maybe now we're in a position like that where we have to leave some cool kids' tables at certain elite institutions that aren't so friendly to us anymore. And if we're true to our background as Jews, we're going to go to new places, we're going to start new enterprises, new media organizations, new universities, or join forces with existing universities and make them cool places. And that's, I think, the key to our continued thriving in the United States. This year is the 370th anniversary of a Jewish presence in North America. And it happened because in 1654, a bunch of Jews fleeing the Inquisition in Brazil, Sephardic Jews, came to New Amsterdam. And the first thing that happened is Peter Stuyvesant, who was an anti-Semite, wanted us kicked out. So he wrote a letter to the Dutch East India Company, or East Indies Company, and said, hey, we've got these Jews here, I'd like to kick them out. And they, to their great credit, said, you are not kicking out those Jews. They could be of certain use in, various professions. Good call by the Dutch authorities against that anti-Semite. So we have 370 years in this country, and it's been an incredibly useful connection for both sides. The first Jew to die in the service of the United States was a man named Francis Salvador. He died defending American independence in 1776. The first Jew to be elected to the Senate was elected in 1845. The first Jew to be elected to a governorship, governor of California, 1887. First Jew in the cabinet, Teddy Roosevelt appointed a Jew to the cabinet in 1906, and Woodrow Wilson put Louis Brandeis on the Supreme Court in 1916. Our roots here are really deep. We are Jews, we are Americans. Mm-hmm. We are Americans, and we have to reconnect with what this country is all about.
Bret, this comes from a student, and I think it probably captures a number of student questions and concerns. And the question is effectively this. I'm concerned about the story of the student on campus at Rutgers, and how should students on campus be free to express opinions, say when they see things they don't like that are frankly horrifying in places like Gaza, and ensure that expressing those opinions and making their voices heard are not creating an unsafe environment.
Yeah. And by the way, people should be horrified by what's happening in Gaza. What's happening in Gaza is that Hamas, a terrorist organization on the order of ISIS, has chosen to build 450 miles of tunnels, 450 miles of tunnels under an area probably smaller than Mesa County, almost certainly smaller than Mesa County, and put themselves behind, beneath, and between civilians. You notice in Ukraine, when the Russian missiles hit Kyiv, the Ukrainian authorities send the women and children down to the metro underground to protect them. Hamas sends itself underground when missiles are falling so that civilians can be exposed. And that's an important distinction that has to be borne in mind. The cowardice of Hamas in hiding behind civilians while it is holding Israeli hostages, whom it refuses to surrender in exchange for a ceasefire. So we should not for one moment blink the fact that civilians in Gaza are suffering, and suffering seriously. But if you don't assign responsibility for that suffering, there's no way you're going to be able to end that suffering. You can say, okay, I want a ceasefire now. But Hamas has said, well, we're going to do October 7th a second, a third, and a fourth time, which means that we would have the same war happen a second, a third, and a fourth time. Benny Gantz, who's the defense minister in Israel, said, you wouldn't send a fire brigade into a burning house and ask them to take out 80% of the fire, right? I mean, that's crazy. You take out 100% of the fire. Now, to the question of the students, I always think that a good intellectual environment is one that says, you know what, don't be afraid to ask a stupid question or even an offensive question, because the only way in which it can be addressed is through a conversation. And the right way of dealing with these questions that students naturally have is raise them. Don't self-censor. Raise the topic. Say, I'm curious, I would like to know how you, Bret Stephens, can defend X. And I'm happy to do it. And then you can say, you know, Mr. Stephens, respectfully, I think you're full of the initials of your name, right? Okay, fine, that's cool, and we'll have a conversation about it. But number one, foster discussions, right? Make sure that curiosity and openness are the animating spirit of the discussion, and make the common sense distinction between criticizing a policy you dislike and vilifying or demonizing the people you think are conducting that policy, as you imagine, for the sake of cruelty or some other bad purpose. It shouldn't be hard. Apply the standards to Israelis as you would sort of want them applied to yourself if you were being suspected of doing something wrong.
We have time for a couple of more questions. This particular question, I think, is maybe a follow-on naturally here, and that is, how do you draw a distinction between those who have a heart for and support what they might self-describe as a pro-Palestinian viewpoint and anti-Semitism?
I'm also pro-Palestinian. I want a Palestinian state, okay? I want Palestinians to live in a free society that's prosperous, that has dignity, that's able to look after its children, and that has a long future. Zionism did not come into being. The state of Israel did not come into being for Jews to be ruled by others or to rule others. Zionism came into being for Jewish self-rule. And what has happened over the last 57 years since the Six-Day War has been a tragedy, okay? So how can you be pro-Palestinian and at the same time effectively support a group like Hamas, which treats Palestinian civilians with so much contempt? It's like saying, I'm pro-American, and by the way, it wouldn't be a bad thing if the KKK were ruling this country. You'd never say that. That's insane, right? You wouldn't say, I'm pro-American no matter who rules the country, right? Or what system of government they have. So we have to create conditions, and I wrote a column just a few weeks ago called An Arab Mandate for Palestine, all right? We have to create conditions so that a future Palestinian state can look a lot like Dubai. Any of you visited Dubai? I mean, okay, it's not a perfect country, but it isn't bad, right? It's impressive. It's not a totally free country, but it's moderate, it's living in peace with its neighbors, it's open to the world, it's commercial, and at the same time honoring its Muslim heritage, its Arabic traditions, right? So why can't Gaza and the rest of the Palestinian territories be just like that? That should be the aspirational goal. And in order to achieve that aspirational goal, someone is going to have to get rid of this totalitarian death cult that has taken power in a portion of that territory. Just as someone had to get rid of the Nazi Party in Germany so that Germany could become a nation of, vegetarian pacifists. I say this with love for my German wife, right? Concerned about, the environment and sustainability or whatever Germans are concerned with. It's wonderful. I mean, think about it. Historically, 800 years, crazy German militarism, and now our biggest problem with Germany is they don't invest enough money in their military. They have no army to speak of. Like, this is a great historical achievement, right? But it happened because the evil movement that was ruling them when my mother was a little girl is gone. Mm-hmm. And that's what we want. We want to have a Palestinian state. We want Palestinians to live in peace and prosperity. And that can't happen under these conditions when this horrible movement has taken its grip on that society.
Well, and even further, Bret, I mean, that is good for Israel.
Of course.
The people who have been lost, the cost of war for Israelis is real. And to have a, vibrant Palestinian country that has people working, that has industry, that has the ability, there's no reason, to your point, there's no reason that, Palestinians can't create the next great, software industry and
there are Palestinian communities all over America, and you meet Palestinians who are prospering in American life. No reason that shouldn't happen in Gaza. And by the way, the point you're making is well taken. I don't think Israelis, there's conscription in Israel. Even if you think the worst about Israelis, think about an Israeli mother whose 18-year-old son has just been drafted or is heading into Gaza. Do you think she wants that? What mother on earth wants that? Or is looking at the possibility of a battle with Hezbollah in the north, which may be the next phase of this war? The Israelis have been trying to get out of the occupation business for a long time. In fact, no country has disoccupied more territory in proportion to its actual size than Israel. Because guess what? I'm from Mexico. Este estado, Colorado, no es gringo. Okay, it's mine. Give it back. You haven't given it back. You're looking at me like flabbergasted. Okay, most countries conquer territory and they don't give it back. They occupy it, they settle it, and war is war, and we won, and that's that. Israel withdrew from all of the Sinai in exchange for peace. It withdrew from all of Gaza hoping for peace, and it didn't get it. Ramallah, all these cities, the majority where Palestinians live, they're ruled by something called the Palestinian Authority. They've been trying to get out of the occupation business for a long time, and they have not been met with a partner on the Palestinian side, whether it's Abu Mazen, who is in the 20th year of his elected 4-term year of office, or with Hamas, which seized power in Gaza by force and hasn't left it in 17 years. They've had some really bad partners. Now, this is not to say that Israeli behavior has always been great. In fact, in some cases, I think it's been bad, all right? But when you have on the one side, a country that says, our only negotiating position is you guys must be eliminated, well, the Israelis aren't going to say, okay, yeah, you're right, we're going to eliminate ourselves, right? So we need to work for a situation where there is Palestinian leadership that wants a better future for Israel, but a better future for Israel is also a better future for the Palestinians. It cannot be zero-sum. It has to be cooperative.
Trustee Foster, I think you have a final question that you wanted to ask.
I'm not going to ask if you'd like to go back to lunch and actually order the right thing this time.
I got the soup.
Yeah, not the right order. So you talked at the beginning about why you came, and I appreciate that, and we've all appreciated that, and we're really grateful that you made the trek to Grand Junction. So tomorrow morning, when Lindy Marshall runs into one of her friends at the coffee shop, what is it that you want them talking about as it relates to the conversation tonight? What is if you can summarize, if you could have one lasting impact in that conversation, what is it?
Well, I hope the thought is he wasn't as stupid and ugly as I was expecting.
Okay, I guess that's it.
But let me offer you a more considered answer. Anti-Semitism is not just a problem for Jews. In fact, it's always an even bigger problem for the society in which anti-Semitism flourishes, including for the anti-Semites. You look at the most anti-Semitic societies in the world, whether it's Egypt or Iran. I wouldn't say Iran, actually, because the people are quite much more friendly to the Jews than the regime, but say Egypt. And these are nations that are eaten up by conspiracy theory, irrationality, and despotism. You look at populations where anti-Semitism takes hold, and it's not just hatred of Jews that becomes a part of their thinking. It's a kind of Rothschild space laser type of thinking, right? And those are societies that are in decline. Historically, societies in which Jews have thrived are societies that have thrived. Whether it was Holland at the peak of its influence, or Spain 800, 900 years ago, where Jews have allowed to be Jews and to make the contributions they can to the wider society, those societies have flourished and had their golden ages. And I hope the American golden age, people talked about the golden age for the Jews, that was the cover of the Atlantic that you referenced. It's not the golden age for the Jews, it's the golden age for the United States. It's the golden age for a culture which revels in fresh ideas, irreverence, arguments, humor, bad jokes like the ones I was telling you
Which one in particular?
off stage afterwards. These are thriving cultures. We Jews want America to want us, okay? Right? That's so important to who we are and our safety and our prosperity. But we so want America to be the kind of place where we've had this incredible and fruitful marriage of values and traditions and ethics that has brought the United States to the best moments in our history, as whether you're a Jew, a Christian, a Buddhist, a Muslim, or an atheist, and you could be Jewish and possibly be all of those. That's when America has been great. So this is not a conversation really about anti-Semitism. It's a conversation about America and what we have to do together to keep it as the country we love.
I want to acknowledge that there were a lot of questions and some incredibly thoughtful questions that were submitted. I also want to acknowledge that there is a broad disagreement in this room. And I just want to say thank you for demonstrating the best of our community in that by being in this room, we don't all agree. Heaven knows that. I've got documentation here. The point is that we're having a difficult conversation the right way, and I want to honor and acknowledge that. This evening, in addition to Bret's great work, was made possible by a handful of organizations and other sponsors, and I want to acknowledge those. The Grand Junction Daily Sentinel and publisher Jay Seaton, grateful for their sponsorship. Intermountain Health, Brian Johnson, the CEO, I think is here, a tremendous sponsor. Jewish Colorado was a tremendous help in making this possible as well. Congregation Or Shalom, Herb and Kate Feinzig, and of course my dear friends and neighbors, the Bremans, who contribute despite the fact that I continue to abuse my privileges of borrowing their farm trailer. I want to just say thank you to all of you, and lastly, as you leave here tonight, you'll have an opportunity as you're walking out to walk into the middle of campus, and what you will see there is a 22-year-old tradition called the Field of Flags. That Field of Flags represents the deaths in the Holocaust. That memorial, I would encourage you to go just walk by it on your way out tonight so that we can all make a commitment in each of our own small way, never again. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you, Bret Stephens, for honoring us here at CMU.